Welcome everyone to our digital dealer exclusive mystery quilt for November. We are stitching our final block of our mystery quilt for this year. We have one more month that will focus on the final border and assembly of our project. So if we recall, our hint last month for our block was this. And are we ready to see what the end result is? Do we have a guess? Here is the November block. We have a couple of purple flowers. The large purple flower is applique. And then we have a couple of red flowers, red and peach flowers down towards the bottom, which feature some fringe in the center. So to set up our design, we are going to need a light mesh cutaway, our poly mesh stabilizer. You will need to apply fusible backing to the wrong side of your background fabric and the wrong side of the peachy reddy fabric for the two smaller flowers. We can put some fusible woven on the back, and you can apply it to the back of the purple if you like, but it is not necessary. The hoop size is stated as 5x7. That is, if you are not quilting in the hoop, this design will fit in 5x7. If you are quilting in the hoop, you are going to need a hoop that will allow you to do like 6.5 by 8.5. So in the world of Bernina, that is our maxi hoop, is the hoop that will fit. And we're going to make 2 of these blocks. Now, the setup for this block is going to be very similar to the setup that we did last month. We are going to be using the Spring 7 design collection, quilting design collection, in the 6x8 design. We're going to bring it in and we're going to move it down, move the design down so that the bottom of the stems meet up with the outside of our quilting design. So just to show you that, here is our machine. We've opened up our embroidery and our quilting design. So this is our 6x8 Spring 7 design. I'm going to add to this design the November, floral design. You can see we have this bottom blue edge of the design needs to be brought down to match the bottom of this quilting design. So you can turn the knobs on your machine. So your stitch length knob is going to be the one that moves the design straight down, or straight up. Because we had a question, if your knobs aren't working for some reason, don't worry. You can bring your finger over to the screen and pull the design down till he lands even with that line, and you can zoom in so that we can see. And then the question will be, what happens if I have accidentally moved it left or right, or you don't know if you moved it? If you come into the eye of the design, the move directional arrow, the move arrow, the X should be at 0. So if the X is at 0, that means you are centered left to right in the hoop. And the number on Y just means the location of where you moved it in the hoop downwards. Negative numbers mean down, positive numbers mean it went up. We can all go back to like algebra and trig and graphing. So the same X and Y axes, positive and negative numbers that are there. We go back to our school days. Don't worry about if your Y doesn't match what my Y does. It's not a big deal. We just want to make sure that the bottom of this design meets up with pretty much the bottom outside edge of that quilting design. The reason for this is it brings the stems down into our seam allowance. So that will allow us to make sure that our flowers are growing out of the sashing versus floating above it. Okay, that's there. And then when you are done, we are ready to stitch. Now, I'm going to go one step further here. So if you remember, in this design, when we have to move this, Kimberbell stitches a placement line and it stitches a basting line. So we have this pink line that's going to show you where to put the fabric, and then that blue line is going to base the fabric down if we are not doing the quilting in the hoop. So if you recall, this is what the steps are if we're not quilting in the hoop. So you would take your background fabric, you'd fold it in half, right sides together, and then fold up the bottom edge 1 inch. You would run that placement line, that pink mark that we just looked at, directly into the stabilizer. We would line up the bottom, here, let me get my marker out here. We would line up this folded bottom with the bottom of this line and the folded side with the tick mark that's right here. Okay, once we have those aligned, then you basically unfold it, smooth it flat, and then the machine will run that basting line that's going to be used to put your background down to your stabilizer. It's what's going to hold it in place. So that's this blue line. Now, when we are stitching, we have to remember, if we're quilting in the hoop, that we need to skip those 2 color stops when we get to them, because of the quilting, we don't need to know where our background fabric is. It's already in the hoop. So we don't need these lines. If you have a Bernina Plus or Pro machine, okay, you will have the ability to ungroup a design. Okay, so if you come into your edit screen, this option right here is ungroup. So I'm going to grab a hold of or select just the floral design, and I'm going to choose the ungroup group icon. And then my only option here is to ungroup, okay? And I'm going to hit that. And what that does is it's going to break every single piece of that design apart. So it's no longer glued together. And this will allow me to grab these 2 color stops and delete them. So I can either come back to the small I can select this tick mark and hit the trash can and confirm it, and then I can grab a hold of my blue square number 2. I can either use the trash can, or I can swipe right or left on that layer, and that's going to bring up the option to delete, and I can hit the check mark. Now that is gone. Now I won't need to worry after I finish quilting. I won't have to worry about remembering to skip the 2 color stops. They're already gone for me. So that's just a little bit, if you have never used the group and ungroup feature. You don't need to necessarily group any of this back together unless you were planning to move things. And so if you wanted to move this whole floral design, everything needs to be glued back together again. So you would select the very first color of the design, which is going to be this green, and I'm going to hit the plus sign, and that's going to automatically group it to the layer above it. And I can just keep hitting group until it's all glued back together. So now I'm back to those 2 designs, the quilting and the floral. And if I need to make any adjustments to the location of that floral design, I can do so now. Okay? So we are ready to stitch. we have the normal steps that we have done for getting our quilting done in the hoop. I've already gone ahead and done my quilting. It is just like we have been doing for the last, what are we on, 11 months that we have. We have done our placement line for our batting. I've placed my batting, tacked my batting and trim it, or pre-cut your batting to the exact size. My background went down. I have basted my background in place, and I have run the quilting design in the cream colored thread for our design. The next steps are to work through embroidering color stops of our design. So we're going to be using the light green to stitch the leaves. We have the lighter purple to stitch those little flower two-fills. Then we're going to switch back to dark green to stitch some more stems and some details. And then we're going to switch out to the darker purple thread. We are going to work through the traditional steps of applique to get this fabric appliqued for our flower. So we're going to run the placement line. We will place our large purple fabric right side up. We will tack it in place, and then we will trim it. Once that is trimmed, we will be stitching the decorative outline detail around the edge of the purple flower, and then change out to the cream and stitch the inner decorative detail of that flower. Once that flower is complete, we are going to work through the steps of appliquing the two lower flowers. Same manners. We are going to run the placement line. We're going to place our fabric right side up, tack it in place, trim it, and then we are going to run the decorative outline. So we can see that this flower here is going to be a satin stitch, which means that when it comes to trimming deep into these little tight places in the bottom or the valleys of the petals, don't stress too much, okay? I would also run these placement and tack down lines in the thread that you plan to use for the cover stitching. Once your cover stitching is done, we will do the decorative outline, which is done in a light pink. And at that point, we will stop. I will come back and we're going to talk about fringe. All right, so let's go and get started. Peach and red flowers have been satin stitched and the decorative stitch is run through the middle of it. Our next color stop is going to begin creating the fringe centers. So the first thing that we need to do is we're going to change to the charcoal color thread, or whatever color you want the centers of your flowers to be. And in the bobbin, we're going to place either water-soluble thread or a visible color. It can be any color as long as it doesn't match your top thread. Okay, so this is a great place to use those randomly wound bobbins that you're ready to get rid of. The purpose of this thread is so that we can see where we need to cut to create the fringe. So we're going to change our bobbin either to water-soluble thread or a visible color, and then we're going to stitch the color stop that's going to stitch the center of our flower fringe. Now, once that color stop is complete, we're going to put back in our neutral bobbin thread. We're going to leave the same color on top. So we're going to put back in our neutral. And we're going to run the final color stop, which is going to stitch the centers of these flowers. This is the stitching that's going to go and hold our fringe in place. Now, when our design is finished, we can go ahead and take the hoop off the machine, and we can take the project out of the hoop if you like, or we can leave it in the hoop and do the next step, which is going to be releasing the fringe. Okay, if you used water-soluble thread, you can take a paintbrush or a Q-tip or even your finger and rub it on the bobbin thread area, that water-soluble bobbin thread area on the back of the hoop, and that's going to release that thread. If you used a visible bobbin thread color, we can either use snips or a seam ripper or anything along that lines to cut that thread color loose so that we can make our fringe release. So you can see there is my front. So this center section is going to stay. This outer ring is our fringe. This is the look that we are going for here. So I'm going to turn this over on the back side. My thread color is this peach color. Okay, so my white was my neutral. I'm going to leave alone. I'm not touching this in here in the center. I'm only going to be clipping the peach around the edge of our circle. Okay, so you can use a seam ripper if you like and take, a couple of threads at a time and cut. You can use a pair of small scissors and snip your way around. Just kind of cutting right in the middle, cutting the peach colored thread that I stitched. Make sure if you use a seam ripper that you don't push all the way through your project. You just want to make sure that you're only cutting the peach colored or your visible color thread and not going all the way to the front of your project. Okay, so I have cut all the way around all that peach. I'm now going to flip it over, and you can just use your finger and start pulling them up. I find a stiletto helpful just to slide in there and kind of pull on, and you pull those loops up to the top. Okay, so again, I'm going to kind of take that into that stiletto or an awl and just kind of push it under that tunnel and lift up. If they don't want to come, turn it back over and see if you can see where you haven't clipped. Some of that cut thread may come up with it. You just pull it out and repeat on the other side. All right, and then once they're all pulled up, you have your fringe flower centers. Our next step is to take our design over to the cutting table, and we are going to trim it up to a 6.5 by 8.5 inch square or rectangle. We want to make sure that the bottom stems or the bottom of the stems of our flowers are aligned on the inside of the bottom edge or at the very bottom of the 6.5 by 8.5. So I have my 6.5 by 8.5 inch orange pop. We also have that original basting line. Again, I don't use that as my final measurement. I would measure it to make sure that it is measuring 6.5 by 8.5 before you go and use it as a guideline. So I'm going to place my 6.5 by 8.5 orange pop. I'm going to place it over top of that design, pretty much almost lining up with that basting line. And I want to make sure that the stems of these flowers are sitting right at the bottom of my ruler. I don't want any gap between them. I want to make sure that I am right next to it, so that way when we sew this together with 1/4 of an inch, we have caught the seams in the seam allowance, or caught the stems in the seam allowance, that is. There is our block. And then you're going to repeat the process to make 2 of those blocks for your quilt. Now, obviously, we know what's coming up in December, or at least we know that it's going to be the border pieces, but we don't exactly know what it's going to look like or anything along that lines. So here is our hint for next month. And we will be back on the 1st of December to discuss this border as well as assembly of our Wallflower mystery quilt. I will also, at that time in December, be discussing our 2026 Digital Dealer Exclusive Mystery with Kimberbell. I appreciate everyone joining us here today, and I hope that you have a wonderful November and a lovely Thanksgiving with family and friends. Once your